College of Arts and Architecture at Penn State, and integrative studies courses have been a really popular request from us, of course, I guess, spring shift to remote, of course. This is a lot of what we've been doing is finding these really interesting overlaps between the arts and other disciplines. And we've got quite a few really interesting courses that our students really seem to enjoy and our instructors really seem to enjoy teaching. So we're going to kind of walk you guys through the process today. We want to make sure that everybody walks away from this session understanding what the difference is between the two different kinds of integrative studies courses at Penn State, which are linked and interdomain. We're going to explore some strategies for developing interdisciplinary learning objectives to make sure that the courses are actually hitting the requirements when they are listed as interdomain. We want to discuss assessment considerations for interdisciplinary learning experiences. We're also going to explore some interdisciplinary course design strategies. And we'd like to end by discussing some potential interdisciplinary pairings and how to find collaborators across the institution. So if this is something that you're interested in, or you know faculty who might be interested in trying to get one of these courses off the ground, hopefully by the end of this, you'll have at least an idea of where to go for those next steps. So to hit that first objective, what are integrated studies courses at Penn State? We have a couple of links at the end of the presentation that will give you the formalized definitions of these courses. But from the learning design perspective, what you need to know is that there are two categories that these courses can fall into, and they're interdomain courses and linked courses. So interdomain courses are typically one course that blends two disciplines together. And the idea of that is that the instructor is demonstrating how domain-specific knowledge can apply across both of those disciplines. And on our next slide, I'll share some examples of what courses fall into which categories. On the other hand, we have linked courses. And for that, a linked course would be two or more courses that are linked together by subject matter, assessments, a common reading, or some other kind of shared content that kind of goes with the students across the entire linked sequence of courses. So those are actually two separate courses that are linked by that common material. Let me just get my little Zoom box out of the way here. Okay. So some of the arts and architecture interdomain courses that we have, well, these are actually our interdisciplinary courses, but some of them are interdomain and some of them are linked. So I can kind of walk through them. The first one is our Introduction to Art Therapy. That's an interdomain course. It's one course that spans one single semester. It's listed as a general arts, and the GS, I believe, is the general social studies. And then we have Architecture 170, which is Introduction to Sustainable Architecture. That's a general arts and general natural sciences. Deb, maybe you can explain, well, you're going to talk about this one a little bit later, but the next one that we have is Art History and Geosciences. And that one's interesting for us because the course actually rotates between two different departments. And the course is Rocks, Minerals, and the History of Art. And so that one kind of takes that GA, the general arts, along with the natural sciences perspective as well. We have the Jazz and the African American Experience, another GA-GS, the Music of the Beatles and American Popular Culture, a GA-GH, and I believe GH is Humanities. Shout out if I'm misrepresenting that one. And then we've got another GA-GN with our forensic photography. This one is actually one of our linked courses. So we've developed in our department the forensic photography 100 class, and it's linked with forensic science 100 out of College of Science. And so the common bond between those two courses is actually the forensic photos that the students make in FRNR 100 are then used in one of the projects that the students will complete in Forensic Science 100. Just because those two courses are linked, it doesn't necessarily require that students take both courses if they just want to do one or the other. But if they're looking to fulfill that integrated studies requirement, and I believe it's 6 credits that students need in order to satisfy that Gen Ed requirement, that's a 2-course sequence. Both of those are 3 credits. The students can easily knock that out together if they have that interest in the forensic sciences. Music 11Z is the same. Under the hood, how classical music works, that one is linked with InArt 50Z, and that one is a GA. And so the interesting thing about the linked courses too is that they don't necessarily have to be two different disciplines. It can be two courses that take a different perspective on the same topic as well.
And I also just wanted to add to that. So if you have a department that's looking for linked courses, you could do it later on. It doesn't have to be in the development phase that you're doing that. So Music 11 initially started off as just a course that wasn't linked. And then eventually he found interest in a course that it really linked to. And they repurposed it and made it a linked course.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion too. The Forensic Science 100 course has actually existed at Penn State for much longer than forensic photography. But I'll address this a little bit later on. There was an interest in potentially trying to create some kind of forensic photography certificate. And we thought that it would be an interesting interdisciplinary exploration to partner up with folks from the forensic science department. So it's an ongoing process. It's a flexible kind of way to try to mix and match these courses, but it always, at least in my experience with developing some of these classes, it's very exciting to see what the faculty come up with in terms of how that domain knowledge applies across these different disciplines. So I want to move into figuring out these interdisciplinary objectives. And I know this image looks really overwhelming. I'm going to give a general overview of what you're looking at here. And then I have a zoomed in version that will hopefully be a little bit easier to take in. So this particular example comes from our sustainable architecture class. And so sustainable architecture, like I said before, it was a GA-GN. So we have the natural sciences objectives coming in with obviously the arts part, and architecture in our university here sits with us in the College of Arts and Architecture. So what the instructor decided to do, because sustainable architecture is actually kind of a thing in architecture on its own. So it's not necessarily that there's like somewhere else in the college that they could have potentially looked for partnerships. But she felt very confident in her own ability, as this was her area of interest and research, and doing this course from the perspective of both the sciences and the arts. So in order to make sure we were addressing those objectives, we grabbed objectives from the GA and the GNs, and then the instructor also had a couple of content objectives, which you can kind of see listed at the top. And those objectives were more about figuring out how the two disciplines kind of come together here in this course. And so across the top, you'll see the different modules that the instructor had planned out. And then she went through and she kind of mapped out where in the course every one of these objectives was going to be met in order to understand and make sure, obviously, that we're hitting everything that we need to hit to make sure the students are actually getting that interdisciplinary knowledge and that we're not leaving anything out or glossing over anything. So that this broad view kind of shows, there's a good mix, things are spread out fairly well. And what we were kind of looking for is making sure there were no gaps. Like we didn't want to, look across a row and see, oh, we completely missed this objective, or, module 3 is really light on objectives that are relevant to the course. So maybe we need to adjust the content that way. Of course, being in the design field, this instructor was very visual, and this was really helpful for her to understand and make sure that she was hitting everything she needed to hit. And it really helped us talk about the objectives in a way that made sense to both of us. So this is a more zoomed in version of it, so you can actually kind of see the way that we use this matrix. So these are the content objectives that I described earlier, where we're trying to kind of blend both the sciences and the arts side of the sustainable architecture endeavor. So for the energy module that the instructor worked through, she had identified some topics that she wanted to hit, and then she just mapped the content objectives into where they fell within each module. So you can kind of see we really in this energy module, we didn't really hit number 4 here, but that is something that later on there's actually an entire module dedicated to certification systems. So we knew that we could be light on it in this one because it's going to be a central feature of a later module. So this was just something I thought was very interesting and helpful as we went about trying to wrap our heads around blending, you know, the sciences and the arts. I'm gonna move ahead. The next example I wanted to share is an interdisciplinary assessment. So this one comes from our Introduction to Art Therapy class, where two of the objectives that this assignment was aiming to help students achieve was to conduct research in psychology, create some artwork, and then create a piece of art based on a community need. That last one was the kind of combination objective there, where they had to do the research and then create something based on their research. So the short description that I included of this assignment, because it is a multi-part project that the students work on from almost module 1 of the course. They have to identify a community. So that community is very broadly defined. It could be like their therapist's office, it could be a hospital, a public park. I saw one student even did like their working community. They worked at a Starbucks and they created an artwork for their break room. So the idea of this is just to like choose some like a group or an area where they can conduct some research on what the needs of that community are. And then they had to create a piece of artwork based on their research, and they're actually required to deliver the art and place it in that space. And they have to document, you know, the process of making the artwork and reflect on their choices for what they chose to do with their art. So these pictures are just some examples from the course, and I'm working with the instructor to conduct a research project in this, like an IRB study in this course. And so a lot of the students who opted into the study did canvas pieces, but the things that they've made are variable. There was one student who made a glass bowl. Other students did paper mache kind of stuff. So they do all kinds of things, and they have to defend all of their choices as far as what they've done in the research paper. And so one of our students, I have a really great example that we analyzed for the paper that we're trying to write up from this class that shows the evidence of the interdisciplinary learning. So on the right here is the student's artwork, and this is a painting on just regular paper. But the student, in the video that they had to create that documented their art creation process and justified their decision-making around the artwork, the student actually says, my decision, to make this image stems from my research paper where I found that subjects from nature and shades of blue were found to be soothing and therapeutic. And I know just from the rest of the context of the student's interview that she ended up placing this artwork in her therapist's office. And so, it was based on the research, a therapist's office is a place where people need to feel calm and they need to feel comfortable, expressing themselves and sharing their feelings. And so the shades of blue thing was something that she could justify from the research that she had done on the paper earlier in the semester. So I thought that was a really kind of just in your face, obvious way of seeing that the objectives were being hit, because the student literally said that that's kind of what they were going for. So that's my part of the presentation. Deb, do you want to take over and talk about your courses here?
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about interdisciplinary course development. I worked on several courses that are interdisciplinary, and all of them had different models that we actually followed. So the first example is Jazz and the African American Experience. With that course, we worked with one department, that was our department, one learning designer, one course author, one multimedia specialist. So we basically took on 2 content areas, all within our own department. I think a lot of people do that. So within that, what we get is one model. We used our design document, which worked very well. It worked for other courses that we developed with him, which was also very good. And the main part of that was the course author. I think a lot of the responsibility really weighed in on him, in that not only did he have to learn his content, and it was content that he already did know, but he had to reach out to people from the other discipline and learn from them and to bring in what he wanted to from that discipline as well. But from what I learned from him, it's something that he really enjoyed. It was a good experience for him. So when you're developing these types of courses, you actually do learn a lot, even from just the discipline that you have. Another course that we actually worked on is Art History, Geo 107, Rocks, Minerals, and the History of Art. That was a very exciting course that we worked on. We actually had, it was a partnership between 2 departments, and it was a little bit more of a true partnership in that we had 2 designers, 2 learning, 2 faculty, co-authors, multimedia specialists and everything. We all just worked together and we learned from one another. And it was just a very enriching experience in that if you had that opportunity to do that, to work together, it's something that's very nice to do. And to make sure that you keep in mind that the student is the focus of that was also a very key point to making that whole experience work, bringing so many people together. We did use 2 different models. We used the design document that we have from ours, and that was basically outlined everything that you do for a course from the beginning to the end. And the Dutton also has a blueprint, which was a lot like what Katrina was talking about, and mapping the objectives together, so we made sure that we didn't miss anything. And what we found out was very important in that if you work with 2 different departments is to make sure you have a to-do list, to make sure that everything is being checked off and being done, because sometimes in your own department, you take it for granted that you're doing your own work and you kind of have a rhythm with the way things work. But if you're working with 2 different departments, that checklist was very important. And the other thing is to make sure you're speaking the same language. We all do it. We all work with our own faculty. We all have our own way of saying things. Just make sure they all mean the same thing so that nobody is saying, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do this or that. And that's very important in doing that. And so when we actually came down to it, and we had the course design, this is what it kind of looked like. The 2 disciplines were sort of separated in that the first half of each outline, I don't know if you could see my cursor, I guess you can't. The first part of the outline, there you go. I saw a black spot there. The first part talks about jazz a little bit more, and then the second half talks about the African-American experience. And we broke it out into 2 units, of course, just like most courses. And so they look very similar to what an ordinary course would look like, but you also have those 2 domains where the students are presented with both different types of material. And in this course, he had a lot of selected writings from a lot of African-American writers, which was very good in bringing the experience of the 2 together. Okay. Course design for art history and geosciences, which is the one that I said was, we worked with 2 different departments. We basically came up with 8 modules for that. Each module had 2 different lessons, and each lesson was 1 week. And for what made this one a little bit more unique is that we made a little bit more of an effort to bring the 2 disciplines together. The video that you see there is an introduction to one of the lessons or one of the modules. And you see there that both instructors are sitting there talking about lapis. And so Maureen, of course, is the geosciences, and she talked a little bit about the rocks parts of it. And Heather brings in and talks a little bit about how those rocks were made into art material. And the students really had a great time with this. So those are just some of the things that we did, and that's how the whole entire structure kind of worked out with this, and how we sort of separated the both still. And eventually you'll see how they come together even just a little bit more. So the assessment phase of the whole thing is where I feel like that the whole entire, how everything was integrated and how students synthesized both domains. The quizzes in both courses, I would say we had separate questions for both domains for each one of those. And those were a little bit more separate. But then it all kind of weaved together eventually when you went to the discussions for art history. It was fun with ochre. Students just loved that activity. It was an activity where students had to go out and they had to get their own dirt because ochre is dirt. And then they brought it in, they mixed it up with something, and they created their own artwork, and they uploaded that to the discussion board. So that was a way where you were bringing both disciplines together. And of course, that was the very first one that they did. It was a little bit more simple. They got a little bit more in depth as they went on into the rest of the course. For the open forums, We do that in Jazz and the African American Experience. And for that one, what you will notice for the open forum is that students really talk about how they feel about the readings that they have and how it relates to the jazz. And you wouldn't expect that to happen, but students are really, the evidence that students are learning is in those posts that they actually make. I didn't share any of those because this is being recorded, but if you go in there and read them, you can really see that students are learning from that. And it's a good way to synthesize the two together. Whoops, go back, one more. And the other one was the unit reflection papers. So they have unit reflection papers where they also are able to give a lot of, synthesizing the material. And then they also have a group project for art history where they work together throughout the entire course. And they have checkpoints where they actually submit certain items within that project. It's like a 10-page paper, but they sort of set it up the way that the student, the instructor set up the course, and that they present the material back to them with the material that they do not present in that class.
Okay, sorry, Deb, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Okay, I know we're running a little short on time, so we'll try to go through this slide quickly, but hopefully not too quickly. And we will share our deck so that the links are accessible for folks after the fact. But basically, getting started with Interdomain courses, if you or someone that you work with has an idea or wants to explore what the possible potential course collaborations could be out there. Some of the ways that we've found that this works out really well is identifying possible partners. You can reach out directly to faculty and other departments, either at your own campus or other campuses. I think actually that's how the art history, rocks, minerals, and art course came together. I think one of those instructors just reached out and, emailed the other, and they were like, yeah, this is cool. We're gonna go forward with it. You can also review some of the existing gen ed courses for points of interest and contact those instructors directly and see if they would be interested in maybe supporting a linkage. You can look for courses that might be of interest to existing programs. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, but the forensic photography course was of interest to the forensic science group. And also we found interest at the criminal justice program at Harrisburg. We've been trying to work out something there where we can provide the material to those students as well. For Architecture 170, the Sustainable Architecture course, there's a sustainable engineering program at Altoona that the instructor was already familiar with, and she hopes to be able to offer that course in partnership with Altoona at some point as we get it off the ground here in the next few semesters. And art therapy itself is actually an area of study that students can pursue at the graduate level. And so the instructor's thinking there is that if we build out some kind of course sequence, students at the undergraduate level might be interested in using that as a pre-graduate school preparation, sort of similar to what you do in pre-med or pre-vet. There's also a university list of proposed interdomain courses or courses that are already in development there. And then we also have a link to more integrative course design resources that have been vetted by the university. Deb, did I miss anything, or do you want to add anything?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like we only have about 5 minutes left, and
right.
if anybody has any questions.
Yep, we're ready for them. I'll stop our share. I was kind of keeping an eye on the Q&A while we were talking, but I didn't see anything come through. If there's anything in the chat that I missed, because that went away from me when I was screen sharing, so I would have to scroll back through.
If no one has any questions, though, I do have a few examples of some SRTE comments that people made that were really interesting for Interdomain.
Okay, it says, we've actually got a couple coming in the Q&A right now. Link that didn't work. Oh, okay, I can put that slide back up so folks want the slides. So I think, let me just pop that back up. Deb, do you see there's a question about course development? How do you keep the design nimble enough so that faculty can update the course?
Well, Well, in these two particular faculty members have like a really close relationship, and they've sort of, they didn't start off that way. They became friends through this whole entire process. I think they really just keep in contact with one another. And if they update anything, then they do. The disciplines are kind of separate enough where they can work on their own content if they need to add anything, and they just keep each other updated if they need to update an assessment. They teach the course separately. So if they do want to like change up their assessment or something like that from one, like say if they want their project to be different, they can go ahead and change it from one semester to the next. They just need to make sure they keep that separate. And yeah, that is the only way that we really kind of can keep track of that whole thing.
We've got another one. Are there opportunities for interdomain builds for adjuncts, or is it full-time only? So from my experiences with this, as long as there's interest, it starts with a course proposal. And so as long as there's a team, you know, that's willing to work with you and kind of help your course get through the proposal process, that part, what I've seen successfully working is when the instructor or the person who's interested in getting the course off the ground kind of solicits others in the departments that might be interested in the topic as well, and kind of gets pre-approval or some pre-feedback. And then when you go through the proposal process, you actually have to consult with other faculty at the university. So then those folks already kind of know what your plan is, and they have already had their chance to provide some feedback. And so then they have the opportunity to document it formally through that curriculum proposal process. So I hope that kind of answers that question. I haven't seen, I don't believe that there's any rule that it has to be, you know, a faculty, like a, you know, full-time faculty versus adjunct. Let's see, we got, what are your design tips to emphasize the connections between the courses? Deb, do you have any off the top of your head? I can think of a few, but I want to give you a chance to.
The only one that I could think of that really helped for us was the intro video, and then we did a video in the middle of the course, and then we did a video at the end. So students really appreciated that because it was a connection, a personal connection, and that you started off with both instructors talking about like geosciences, and then in the middle from the geosciences to art history, they did, they blended it into, you know, they introduced the next topic, and then at the end they kind of did a summary. So blending that and having those points there where you can actually bring in each topic kind of really helped.
Yeah, I would echo that and say, you know, in our design process that we have at Arts and Architecture, we always post our objectives with every lesson. And I think that really helps, you know, to just put it right there in front of the students, because I mean, the idea is that they're actually getting the objectives, not that we're making them guess at what they're supposed to be learning from each of these lessons. So we post our objectives. I know for the way I like to design these courses, there's usually some kind of progressive project that goes throughout the course that they start in the beginning, they have a checkpoint in the middle, and then like the culminating version of it is due at the end. And the project really pulls from both disciplines, and they need to have that domain knowledge from both and understand how to apply it in both in order to successfully complete that project. So hope that covers that one.
Okay, everyone, just wanted to let you know we're out of time. Thanks so much to Katrina and Deborah for the interdomain courses knowledge this morning.